Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us this evening for the Six Bridges Book Festival. My name is Amy Bradley Hull, and I'm really excited tonight to get to have a conversation with authors John McMahon and Jean Hanff Korelitz, who's sponsored in full by Wordsworth Books. So welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you here for our second virtual fest that we've done. I've been with the fest for many, many years. Last year, of course, was super interesting. This year, we're continuing the tradition with the virtual fest. It's a little different than being in person, of course, but it allows us to have so many amazing authors visit with us and then have a great wide variety of people from all over the world, in fact, join us in our audience. So welcome wherever you're from tonight. So I mentioned that Wordsworth was a sponsor tonight. And speaking of Wordsworth Books, they are, besides being a really awesome independent bookseller here in Little Rock, they're also the official bookstore of the fest. And if you look in the chat section there on your right-hand side of your Zoom page, you'll see the links to the online shop where you can purchase the books we're discussing tonight, along with other books featured at the fest. Also, use that chat function tonight to drop any questions or comments that you might have for Jean or John. You can use that chat, or you can use, if you look down there at the bottom of your screen, you'll see something that says Q&A. You can also put a question in there, whichever you prefer. I'm going to monitor both channels. So your choice, if you want a question to be anonymous, you can make it be anonymous in that Q&A section. So now let's go ahead. We've got the housekeeping out of the way. I want to go ahead and introduce our authors. Jean Hanff Korelitz is the author of The Plot. Let's see, I'll bring it up here, along with numerous other bestsellers. If you're a fan of binge watching TV shows like I am, then you might have enjoyed The Undoing on HBO. It starred Hugh Grant and Nicole Kidman. Well, that was an adaptation of one of her books called You Should Have Known. In addition, she's published a collection of poetry, a middle reader book called Interference Powder, I believe. And with her husband, the Irish poet Paul Muldoon, she also has adapted James Joyce's The Dead as an immersive theatrical event. So as you can tell, she's very multi-talented. In addition, she's created a really, really, really cool program that I want to tell y'all about. It's called Book the Writer. And in fact, in a minute, I'm going to drop a link to this in the chat so that you can see it. What she's done is she's basically created these small pop-up events, like really intimate events that allow authors and fans to come together in conversation. I think that's really amazing and really special. And I just love the concept of it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but y'all are still doing some Zoom events. Is that correct, Jean?
Well, what we're doing is a hybrid of in-person and Zoom. So for example, on Monday, we have Alexandra Andrews, who wrote Who is Maud Dixon? There'll be about 17 of us in the room with her. Mm-hmm. And then we've got about 20 people joining us on Zoom, and they too will be able to ask questions. It's excellent. Not perfect, but it's this is our world.
So we're all adapting to it. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to drop a link to that there in the chat in a minute, so y'all can go and check it out. And we also have John McMahon with us. He is the author of A Good Kill, which is the third in a series about a really gritty, flawed, damaged Georgia cop. His first two novels were each named top 10 crime novels of the year by the New York Times Book Review. His debut book was a finalist for both the Edgar Award and the Thriller Award for the best first novel. He first honed his writing chops in the advertising business. And here is a cool fact that I found out about him. As the creative director of an ad agency, he actually wrote a Super Bowl spot for Alfa Romeo. So he currently lives in Southern California, but we are going to welcome him tonight as an honorary Southerner because he writes so well about the South and all of the quirks and qualities of these Southern states. So I'm going to let them each read from their books in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you how much I enjoyed reading them. Oh, wait, I forgot to hold up John's book. Sorry about that. There you go. So I don't know about you, but over the past year and a half, I have to be honest with you, I've struggled to read much of anything. I went from like dozens of books a year to like 3 or 4 books a year. So it's just, my concentration has been absolutely shot. And anything that is too heady, too literary, too pretentious, I just wasn't into it. It's not my cup of tea. So when it came time to choose the books I wanted to read for the fest, I knew that I wanted something really fast paced. I wanted to be thrilling. I wanted it to be something that kept me on my toes and kept me up all night long because I couldn't put the book down. And I have to tell you, both of these books fit the bill. They were page turners. They were really quick reads. In fact, I'll say I plowed through John's book so quickly. I read the entire series, like just in the past, like 3 weeks, because they were just that good, that rapid pace. So if that's the kind of book you're looking for, they're perfect. But I have to tell you, just because I'm sitting here telling you that they're, page turners and really quick reads, that does not mean by any means that these books were light or forgettable. The characters, the scenes, the themes of each of these books, well, they stuck with me a long time after I reached the final page. So I certainly think you would enjoy them as much as I do. But now we're going to hear from the authors. So I'm going to let them each tell us a little bit about the book and then read a little bit from it. And then Jean, I'm going to let you go first. But before you start, please tell us where you're joining us from tonight.
I am joining you from lovely South Salem, New York, just outside of New York City, although just outside. It took ages to get here tonight because of traffic. But I'm with my 95-year-old dad. My sister and I take turns spending weekends with him, and it's my weekend. So that's where I am. Oh, so I'm going to talk now. Okay, so the plot is my 7th novel, and it is this. It may be the strangest novel I've ever written. It was certainly the strangest writing experience that I've ever had. I've written books that literally took 20 years of preparation before I wrote a single word. And only once before have I gotten an idea out of nowhere and started writing it immediately. The other time was You Should Have Known, which a version of which, I should say, became The Undoing. Those of you who've read You Should Have Known know how different the novel is from the television show, which I loved, but it was very, very different. The plot kind of came out of nowhere in the middle of a meeting that I was very unhappy meeting I was having with my editor about the other book that I was writing, which was not going well. And in fact, she was in the process of turning down the book in this meeting that we were having. And I suddenly heard myself starting to tell her about this other idea that I had about a writer who had run out of ideas, who was teaching in this kind of rock bottom Master of Fine Arts program. He has this incredibly arrogant student who announces that he doesn't need anything because he's got this perfect book and it's going to make him rich and famous. Now, when we writers hear rich and famous, we know there's not much to latch onto in this speaker, because most of us are, even if we're reliably published, we're not rich and famous. So he just says to himself, this guy's a jerk. But then this student actually tells him the story that he's writing, and it is so spectacular that the teacher realizes that it's absolutely true. This guy's going to be everything that he claims he's going to be. So a few years go by. I'm catching you up to where I'm going to read a little bit. And our protagonist discovers that his student has died. And he died very shortly after their meeting. Ergo, this novel not only has never been published, but it probably has never been written. And suddenly he sees it in a different way. This is not the story that his student has brought to class. This is an extraordinary, untold, unwritten story, and he has responsibilities to it as a writer. So he has a kind of dark night of the soul in which he makes a very fateful decision, and that is the excerpt that I'm going to read. I have now told you nothing that you can't read on the jacket of the book. We're very, very careful about this book and how we talk about it, because there's so much we don't want the reader to know. And frankly, I have been amazed at how good and decent readers have been in not sharing too much about this book. So yay, readers. Okay, so this is Jake, our protagonist, and he has just discovered that his student has died, and this is what he thinks. Stories are maddeningly elusive. There's no deep mine of them to blast around in, or a big box store with wide aisles of unused, undreamed of, and thrillingly new narratives for a writer to push a big empty shopping cart through, waiting for something to catch their eye. But every now and then, some magical little spark flew up out of nowhere and landed in the consciousness of a person capable of bringing it to life. This was occasionally called inspiration, though inspiration was not a word writers themselves often used. Those magical little sparks tended not to waste time in declaring themselves. They woke you up in the mornings with an annoying tap, tap, and a sense of unfolding urgency, and they hounded you through the days that followed. The idea, the characters, the problem, the setting, lines of dialogue, descriptive phrases, an opening sentence. To Jake, the word that comprised the relationship between a writer and their spark was responsibility. Once you were in possession of an actual idea, you owed it a debt for having chosen you and not some other writer. And you paid that debt by getting down to work, not just as a journeyman fabricator of sentences, but as an unshrinking artist, ready to make painful, time-consuming, even self-flagellating mistakes. Rising to this responsibility was a matter of facing your blank page and muzzling the critics inside your head at least long enough for you to get some work done, all of which was profoundly difficult and none of which was optional. What's more, you stepped away from it at your peril, because if you failed in this grave responsibility, you might well find after some period of distraction or even less than fully committed work that your precious spark had left you. Gone, in other words, as suddenly and unexpectedly as it had appeared, and your novel along with it. Though you might spin your wheels for a few months or a few years or the rest of your life, hopelessly throwing words onto the page in a stubborn refusal to face what had happened. And there was something else, an extra dark superstition for any writer hubristic enough to ignore the spark of a great idea, even if that writer was not of a religious bent, even if he did not believe that everything happens for a reason, even if indeed he resisted magical thinking of every other conceivable kind. The superstition held that if you did not do right by the magnificent idea that had chosen you among all possible writers to bring to life, that great idea didn't just leave you to spin your stupid and ineffectual wheels, it actually went to somebody else. A great story, in other words, wanted to be told. And if you weren't going to tell it, it was out of here. It was going to find another writer who would, and you would be reduced to watching somebody else write your book. Good writers borrow, great writers steal, Jake was thinking. That ubiquitous phrase was attributed to T.S. Eliot, which didn't mean Eliot himself hadn't stolen it, but Eliot had been talking perhaps less than seriously about the theft of actual language, phrases and sentences and paragraphs, not of a story itself. Besides, Jake knew, as Eliot had known, as all artists ought to know, that every story, like every single work of art, from the cave paintings to whatever was playing at the Park Theater in Cobleskill to his own puny books, was in conversation with every other work of art. He would hardly be the first to take some tale from a play or a book, in this case a book that had never been written, and create something entirely new from it. Miss Saigon from Madame Butterfly, The Hours from Mrs. Dalloway, The Lion King from Hamlet, for goodness sake. It wasn't even taboo, and obviously it wasn't theft. Even if Parker's manuscript actually existed at the time of his death, Jake had never seen more than a couple of pages of the thing, and he remembered little of what he had seen. Surely what he himself might make from so little would belong to him, and only to him. He hadn't gone looking for this. He had upheld the honor of writers who listened to the ideas of other writers and then turned responsibly back to their own. He had absolutely not invited the brilliant spark his student had abandoned, involuntarily abandoned, to come to him, but come it had, and here it was. This urgent, shimmering thing, already tap-tapping in his head, already hounding him, the idea, the characters, the problem. So what was Jake going to do about that? A rhetorical question, obviously. He knew exactly what he was going to do about that. And he does. And bad things happen.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I have to say, I'm glad you picked that passage because I have to say, when I read that part of the book, it inspired me to stick a notebook in my bag and to carry it around with me everywhere, so that when I had ideas, I would stop and jot them down, whether it was, a grocery list or an idea for a project or something with work or this or that, just so that I was like, he's so right. You do need to not lose that spark. It's put there for a reason. So I started writing down things based on that passage in the book. So I'm kind of glad you read that one. I loved
Well,
it.
that's more than I do. So you're doing better.
I will say though, we'll go on here in a second, John, but I will say I'm glad you did not pick one part. There was one part of your book where, and again, I'm not going to say much about it because we just can't without ruining things, but there was one part in your book where one character, there is an author who is on a bit of a book tour, and this person is, there's a little internal monologue in the person's head about how, oh gosh, it's yet another interview with like yet another insipid local asking dumb questions. And I was like, the minute I read that, I was like, oh God.
Well, if
what do I do?
It makes me feel any better. I myself have never been on a book tour, so that was
okay. I was like
completely made up. For all I know, it's not like that at all.
All right. So no, thank you so much for reading that for us. That was wonderful. All right, John, we're going to throw it over to you here, and Jean, share with us where you're reading from before you get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So good evening, and I am joining you from Southern California. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Again, my name is John McMahon, and I have 3 books in a mystery series, and I thought I'd read from the first one. In case you like it, I don't spoil anything, and you can start there. So it's called The Good Detective, and it's a police thriller. It's set in northern Georgia, and the main character's name is P.T. Marsh. And the excerpt isn't the opening, so I'll give you a little quick lay of the land so you'll know where we are. So P.T. Marsh is kind of a rising star on the police force in Mason Falls, Georgia. But the deaths of his wife and son before the book started have left him sort of reckless and adrift. So the story opens with him waking up in a parking lot of a strip bar, and he's fallen asleep in the driver's side of the truck. His dog Purvis is in the back, and the bouncer has heard him screaming in his sleep and has jolted him awake. And as he drives off, he finds a paper in his pocket with a phone number of a dancer named Crimson from the bar that he had promised the night before, because she was showing some bruises, that he would come by and scare her boyfriend. So this is the scene where PT comes upon the girl. So here we go. The redhead lay there in cut-off jeans and a V-neck with no bra. Her cheeks showed fresh bruises, and her t-shirt bore the face of a Georgia bulldog in pink. I had told her that I'd come by official with a squad car a day earlier. Don't make promises you can't keep, PT. It was Purvis's voice that I heard. Of course, he's a brown and white bulldog with a bad underbite, and I'd left him back in the truck by the big lots where I'd parked. So maybe it was my voice and his face. The subconscious works in strange ways, right? Or is that God? I made my way inside, hurrying to see if Crimson was alive. I leaned over and checked her pulse. She'd been knocked around, but her breathing was fine. I shook her awake, and it took a moment for her to recognize me. Your boyfriend here? In the dim light, she pointed to the living room. He's sleeping. You got a friend you can stay with for a couple hours? Let me talk some sense into him? Crimson nodded, grabbing her sweatshirt and purse. Crimson nodded, grabbing her sweatshirt and purse. I moved to the living room, and my eyes adjusted to the dark. Crimson's boyfriend was passed out in a sitting pose on the couch in a dirty tank top and jeans. A brick of weed sat on a wooden table by the couch, and one of the boyfriend's hands was wrapped in gauze. A strip of dried blood was smeared across the fabric. So here's the thing. You spend the first 36 years of your life learning a value system, what's right, what's wrong, and when to say to hell with it and toss the rules aside. But you accumulate things too, a house, a mortgage, a wife and kid, and somewhere along the way, those responsibilities matter more than right and wrong, because there's consequences. Doing absolute right can create problems for you and your family, for your career. For me, that was the road I'd been on. A beautiful wife, young son, and I'd been as happy as a pig in shit going down that path. But someone came along and took my responsibilities away, took away my family, and all they left me with was absolute justice. I ran my flashlight over the boyfriend's chest. He looked to be in his early 30s, a muscle-bound 5'9", shaved head and a blonde goatee. A tattoo on his biceps read 88, the eighth letter of the alphabet, H, 2 H's for Heil Hitler. So you're a neo-Nazi who beats up strippers. The man's mouth was open and a bead of drool hung down from the corner of it. A half-empty bottle of Jack was curled under his right arm. I sat down in an armchair a foot from him, grabbed a dish towel nearby and wrapped the soft cloth around my fist. Hey, dipshit, I said. His eyes fluttered open and he sat up. I looked to the bedroom. Who the hell are you? He mumbled, disoriented. He smelled like pomade and tobacco. Don't worry, I said. The cops are here. So that's the excerpt. To give you the setup, the next morning, PT receives a call. Again, I'm not ruining anything you wouldn't read on the book jacket. And a lowlife has been beaten to death. And as they drive to the house, PT realizes it's the same house he went to that night. And he can't remember how he got home. He'd been drinking and he swears to himself he didn't kill the man, but he knows also that his prints are all over the scene.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, so I very specifically wanted y'all to kind of tell a little bit about your books. Normally, sometimes I do that, but I really did not want to do it this time because both of you have books that are so, not secretive. That's not the word I'm looking for, but yeah, they're just so, it's kind of just beyond the typical, hey, there's a plot twist kind of thing. I mean, I think we all remember when somebody ruined Sixth Sense for us for the first time, or maybe Gone Girl or something like that.
For me, it was Murder on the Orient Express.
Was it? Yeah.
I'll never forgive that.
Listen, I remember I took my boys to see that when they were, of course, much younger with the remake of it. And I can remember they just sat there like in awe. That was the first time they had ever kind of experienced something like that. It was just a complete shock or surprise, and they've just kind of been hooked on those kind of things ever since. Yeah, I mean, but both your books kind of go beyond that in a way. It's not just like, oh, let's not ruin the plot twist. It's like there are some twists and then some S curves, and then you fall off a cliff and then you get back up and everything. So it's like I was too nervous to even want to kind of start giving any details about the plot or what it's about, because I just didn't want to, ruin it. And so yes, thank y'all so much for sharing, mainly since I didn't have to do it and get myself in trouble. But yeah, normally, so we're going to start having a conversation here in a little bit. Again, audience, I want to remind y'all, please pop some questions in there. We're not going to get into too much detail about what the books are about, because you're just going to have to read them. I'm not going to be the spoiler. But I definitely want to, like I said, I'm about to get the conversation started here. I've got a few questions of my own for Jean and John, but I want y'all to pop in, build off of any of the questions we talk about, but do not by any means ask us what the book's about, because we're just not going to tell you.
It's for your own good.
So Gary's got a question. And I'm gonna read Gary's question to everybody. And Gary, this is a great question that kind of dovetails with something that I was going to ask also. So Gary says, both of these are just waiting for some party to call and put them on film. How do you choose to write the novel versus screenplay? So yeah, to Gary's point, what made you want to write a novel, not be a screenplay writer? Or, or do you, I'll take it a little step further. When you're writing something, do you kind of have that in the back of your head that, hey, if this were going to, be on film, does that change how you write it or no?
You want to
talk about that a little bit
first, John?
Yeah, I mean, Jean probably has a lot more experience in this than me. There's definitely been some companies that took a look at it, and a pilot was written for The Good Detective. I don't know. I just love the process of writing a book. To me, I love the character development that happens. I mean, specifically in writing a series, where you can really arc a character, in a more credible way over multiple books. So that's, and that's my preference. I know some of the people looking at my books, I've had some things in there. I've got a school shooting in a book. I've got a cop being investigated. I've got some other stuff in book one, which I won't give away, but some of these things are little hot point issues right now culturally. So I think I've heard some of that feedback, like there's some hot things in this book that are keeping it away from film right now, but they're also, I think they're all timely cultural things that we're just dealing with together all as a culture. So I think it's cool when some of those elements can get into, popular fiction.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, that kind of surprises me because that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think about some of the topics in your books, is that they are very timely. There's very hot button, controversial topics, but they are things that we are dealing with right here and now. So I would have thought that rather than making people shy away from wanting to produce that, it might make them a little more keen to. But yeah, I guess, I mean, you can see where some of that, because you aren't afraid to go there on some of the things that happen in the book for sure.
So my experience with this, my first three novels, three novels, the same experience. It was so exciting. There was like this Hollywood feeding frenzy. The publisher or the agent's office would suddenly, through some mythical, magical thing, everybody would call and you would feel like, oh my God, this is amazing. 5, 10, 15, 20 people called within 24 hours wanting to read The Galley. You think, oh my God, it's definitely going to happen. And then it all just goes away. So what you learn from this is it doesn't mean anything. So when the fourth novel actually sold, I was quite stunned. And this was my novel Admission, which was taken on by a producer who had just been through not college admissions, but is full of rage and loathing. So she liked Admission, and she had a screenwriter that she wanted to work with. So there was never any question of my being involved in writing it. The next book, You Should Have Known, sold straight to David E. Kelley, who wrote the screenplay. So again, no possibility of my being involved. I mean, I have always wanted to try it. And now that the plot is inching towards adaptation, the one thing that I asked for in the negotiation was, can I be part of this? And it's not that I want to, suddenly become, a different person, with a different, job. I've always wanted to try it. And look, nobody's going to hire me to adapt a novel that I didn't happen to write. So this is really an opportunity for me to learn something. And, at my age, my advanced age, it's a wonderful thing to be able to learn something new. So the plot is going to be adapted. It's all happening like last week and this week. There's nothing I can say publicly, but it's really exciting. And yes, I will be in the writer's room. I'll not be the head writer. I do not want to be the head. But I get to be there, and that's awesome.
That is cool. Well, so one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and since we're kind of on the subject here, is speaking of books going into movies, I think Admissions was probably the first one of your books I ever read, which eventually went on to become a movie starring Tina Fey. And I can remember when I saw it's going to be a movie with Tina Fey, I was like, because it's a little bit dark.
I'm really confused.
The comedian, And then same thing with You Should Have Known. I had read that, and then I saw something about The Undoing, and I was like, that kind of sounds familiar, but that's not quite the same. Well, then I watched it. And then I watched it, and I was like, yes, it is based off that book, but there were some major differences in the plot there, and so not major, not minor, but not major either. But
you're allowed to say major. It was pretty major.
Yeah. So one of my questions for you was like, how does that make you feel when they take it and they kind of change it a bit? Is that like, no, don't take my baby from me? Or is it like, cool, look what it did, look what it inspired, look,
Age. We became friends. We're still friends. And when we did like an article together about the adaptation for New York Magazine, it's probably still online somewhere. And we talked about it as our, what was it like to sort of hand over the baby? But I will say that by the time You Should Have Known came along, I had worked out all of that stuff. I was so zen. I just said, you take it away, do whatever you need to do. And I really feel that this is the only way to do it, because nobody's making you sell your book for adaptation. There have been authors who said, I don't want any part of this. Don't come near it. And, that's great. Good for them. But if you're going to take money for somebody to be able to adapt it, you have to let them adapt it. I mean, that is an art form of its own. You can't say, I have borrowed from things and I have referenced things and I have probably, said things that I overheard in the checkout line, but no, I'm not going to let anybody else have that freedom to adapt. No, if you take, you give.
Yep. All right. So here is a question for both of y'all from Leanne. She said, do you both have other jobs? And if so, how do you manage it? How do you, juggle the day job and the dream job or whatever it might be?
Who wants to go first? You have like a major other job, John, right?
Yeah, so I'm a creative director, creative director in advertising. So that is a dream job too. So I've basically built that job myself over a period of years, along with a lot of other people at the agency, and built that team. So that is something I always wanted to do, and I still want to do it. So it's just, how do you juggle and do everything? So so that's and that changes every year itself. Like the type of clients you work with completely changes the nature of what you're doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just it's really gratifying, and then I find this really gratifying also.
I have all these little jobs. I mean, obviously being a novelist is the big job, but I also run Book the Writer. I freelance for a college counselor. I'm still in the admissions world. I'm still fascinated by it. So today we were emailing some essays back and forth. She's very principled. She's not Rick Singer. She doesn't pay anybody to go to your alma mater, John. She's a good old fashioned, you're going to do 30 drafts of this essay before we tell you it's okay. And I really enjoy that. And I don't know, I was just talking about this earlier tonight with the young woman who wanted to talk about, she's a graduate of my college, and she called me to talk about her career issues. And I said to her, the less time you have, the more you use it. And there's this kind of conventional wisdom that if you really want to get something done, you give it to the person who's already too busy, because they just get it done. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I see that, and I live that, I think. So for me, it's true.
Here.
Yeah. So Susan has a question here. I'm going to come back to it in a minute because I want to go a little bit deeper with it. But Andrea also has a question. Who are your own favorite writers, or who has influenced your writing the most?
Oh, so many.
I know.
Weirdly, I don't think of this in terms of writers. I think of this in terms of individual novels. In my case, they're all novels. I have this list of 6 that are my personal pantheon. It used to be 4, and then a few years ago I said, "This is ridiculous. I have to. What are we saying about the Supreme Court now? Broadening the court.
You got to expand. Yeah.
I had to expand the court. And the reason it's not writers is that for every writer who has written a novel that I've loved, they've also written a novel that I haven't loved. So I think it's just easier to go with the book. So I'm happy to give you my top 6. Get your pencils out. You've heard of them all already. You won't be surprised. Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping. Those of you who've read the plot already may know that already. Pride and Prejudice, because duh. Thank you, Anne, for writing this down. My Name is Asher Lev by Chaim Potok. This is a very personal choice. I don't think it's a great novel, but for me, it was a really important novel. Here's the wild card, The Odessa File by Frederick Forsyth, one of the best novels I've ever read, a fantastic plot-driven novel.
Yep.
Very well written too. Don't diss it just because it's been in a drugstore or in an airport. And the two that I added a few years ago, one is a novel called Good Behavior by the great Irish novel Molly Keane. And the other is by the British-Australian writer Neville Shute, and it's called A Town Like Alice. So there you go. Those are my top 6.
All right. Thank you. I have to all go read those too. So
Please do. They're awesome.
Great job.
For me, kind of grew up reading, loving Hemingway. So that's probably one I grew up with that I just kept returning to. And I would say kind of in the genre I'm writing, James Lee Burke is probably my favorite writer. And I feel like just you live in the courtyard that he describes, and you live on the boat that he's on, and like he just is a master of setting. So I think I kind of break down where I start looking at, like, I'm reading someone for setting, and I'm reading someone for plot, and I'm reading someone, I love Michael Connelly, and I think he's like a master of setups and payoffs and plot. So for the mystery genre, I really, enjoy his work. But I also find that, like, whenever I'm on one of these panels, I tend to like read 1 or 2 books of an author, and you're constantly thinking, wow, there's just like hundreds and hundreds of authors I've never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a book festival, I don't know, a year or so ago with Brian Panowich, and read a couple of his books, and they're so visceral, and I just love them. And I read, as you guys know, I didn't read Jean's book. I listened to it on audio while I drove. I was on our book research road trip, and got it on audio, which is sort of like reading it, but sort of different. And I loved her work. So there's so many great authors out there around every corner that you've never even heard of,
How do you feel about Thomas Perry?
Not familiar.
All right, go read Thomas Perry.
Okay. Got to write that down now.
Got my pen out.
Okay. He has a series. He writes standalones as well, but he does have a series about a character named Jane Whitefield, who is a Native American woman. And that, okay, here we go. But I'm so glad he wrote them because I love them. And the first one of those is called Vanishing Act. And he's just awesome. He's so awesome.
Thank you for the tip there. Okay, so now that y'all have talked about your influences, this kind of comes back to what Susan was asking, and a deeper question that I wanted to ask. And Jean, this kind of goes to your novel, but John, you are certainly going to be qualified to answer this. This is a question and some thoughts for both of y'all. So again, not to give too much away from your book, but this is kind of, hinted at in what you read, Jean. This has to do with someone who heard someone's story and had to decide whether or not they were then going to bring that story to life. And the whole novel kind of deals with themes like, we all know that saying. I think it actually comes from the Bible. There's nothing new under the sun. Is that really the case? Is there anything, novel in the literal sense of the word? Is there anything new out there? Has everything already been done? When we read something, when we watch something, when we hear a conversation, listen to a podcast, we're going to take it in whether we realize it or not. When you guys are talking about these authors who have influenced you, of course, you're learning from them. How much of that do you take in and then spit back out? And, I really think this is very pertinent these days because people put a lot of stuff out there on social media about themselves. Things that we might not ever have been privy to in the past. We learn things about our friends, about our acquaintances. We hear snippets of their stories. We see bits and pieces of their lives. And, if you're the kind of person who's in creating and putting something back out into the world, some of that might creep in for you a little bit. So Susan's specific question was, Jean, what would you do in the same situation as your protagonist? But I asked you kind of both overall, what's that like? Do you think inspiration is a wonderful thing, or do you get scared?
I gotta stop you before you add 10 more questions to this question.
Sorry,
there've already been like 6 really good questions.
I know, but it's because it's really like it's kind of a meaty subject matter here.
Well, it is the subject matter.
Yeah,
for writers, we are all obsessed with this. We are fascinated by all forms of plagiarism. This is not unique to us. Cookbook writers accuse other chefs of stealing recipes. Comedians steal other comedians of stealing jokes. But there's something about what we do that feels deeper. Maybe it's because it takes a lot longer to write a novel than it takes to make a joke or write a recipe. But that the academic geek in me is very deeply buried, but she wants to come out long enough to remind everybody that the novel is called the novel because it was new. It was novel when it was first created, and you can probably debate me on this, but let's call it the middle of the 18th century. That's not very long ago. I mean, the poem is ancient, but the novel is a new art form, and it had its adolescence at the beginning of the last century with all the modernists. Now we're in this kind of, I forget what it's called. There's a term for it, metafiction or something where people are kind of blending fiction with personal experience. I have never done that. I do not ever want to do that. I never write autobiographically in fiction anyway. So the way I look at it is, is there anything new under the sun? Probably not. Everything that has ever happened in one of my books, probably one of John's books, has happened somewhere to somebody. We are all readers first, and that means that we gorge ourselves on other people's written stories, fictional stories. And they're all in there churning around from childhood, from like under the covers with the flashlight. Whether we remember them or not. And I think one of the reasons that writers, novelists in particular, are so obsessed with plagiarism is that we have a deep fear that we're doing it. And I'm not talking about cutting and pasting language. That is inexcusable. But sometimes when I've written a sentence, I've thought, did I read that somewhere? Or when I describe a character, I think, is there some other character from some book I've read that's kind of banging away in my head saying, no, you didn't write that? And it's terrifying because as awful as it is to be copied, we're honorable people, I would say, most of us, and we don't want to do to others what we don't want done to ourselves. And sometimes we're just not entirely in control of it. So I don't know how many of the questions in your question I answered, but that's more than one. So I'm going to stop and let John talk.
But no, thank you for helping me get my thoughts together there. I appreciate it.
I think it's definitely like, it is on the mind of writers, like Jean said. And I think there's a lot of writers I know, myself included, that have an anxiety over being influenced, and they'll stop reading. I stop reading anyone's work, and there'll be people I know that say, what are you reading right now? And I'll say, oh no, I'm in revisions. I can't read anything. And it's a silly notion that you can stop yourself from being influenced, because influence is just bombarding you constantly. But what you're really talking about is, I don't want to be reading Jean's character and start writing my character like it's her character, because at some point a really good writer is a mimic, and you can pick something up and you've got an ear for it, and you start getting an ear for character and an ear for dialogue and an ear for choices, and you can be really easily influenced. And
can I just add something to that? What you said is so true. And I would go a step further and say that the mimicry that we as novelists have is a necessary phase, especially early on. Like my husband is a poet. He spent years in his early, you know, the time that he was writing poetry, mimicking the poetry of T.S. Eliot. When I was a poet, I wrote like Sylvia Plath. I don't think it's a bad thing to do. I think it's a phase, and you move through it to something resembling your own, preoccupations and ways of putting language together. But it is not for us to disparage the necessity of mimicking other writers. It's part of how we learn.
Yeah, and you sometimes you'll say, I really like the way they did that, and you'll look at it as a professional in a different way. And I think it's also it's stuff all around you. I mean, you're looking at a lot of, there's actors who look at the written word and they bring it to life on stage, or they bring it to life on TV, and then you see it dimensionalized in a new way, and you say, oh, that's an interesting character, and it's so much, sometimes it's more fleshed out than it might have been on the screenplay or in the book, and you're able to see it in a completely different manner. And in seeing in that manner, you're developing an archetype character in your head, and like these are helpful, when you're trying to write, especially for sorry, bugs in the room, especially for minor characters and things like that, I would say.
Yeah, true.
But I was curious, reading or listening to Jean's book, whether I guess my question is, the author in the excerpt you read does a really good job of, I would say, rationalizing pretty convincingly that like everything is owned by everyone. And I guess my question is, in having to build that character as a writer, did it change your view? Did it expand what you think is ownable? Do you think, I don't want to use the expression like fast and loose, but do you think you're playing a little faster and a little looser with things because that character taught you something, if that's the right way to put it?
Good question.
I do not condemn Jake for what he did. If he had copied one sentence, it would be a different story. But he takes this, I mean, it's not like he thinks his former student is out somewhere writing this book. It's not like he said, oh my God, that's an amazing story, and he started writing it immediately. He knew who it belonged to. I always think about the famous group of writers. They were a group of writers before there were writers groups in the 40s or 50s in Oxford. They were called the Inklings, and it was a bunch of Oxford dons who were writing fiction. One of them was J.R.R. Tolkien. Another one was C.S. Lewis. Those guys would come in and say, hey, I had a great idea. I'm going to send them through a wardrobe into this whole new land. There's going to be a witch, and somebody's going to eat Turkish delight. Nobody touched that. Nobody, well, maybe they didn't think it was very good, but, nobody went home and started writing about orcs and elves and whatevers. There is honor. You respect the creative, toil of your peers. So there is that honor. But what if J.R.R. Tolkien had said, hey, I have this great idea about an orc and an eye of Sauron, and then he went and just killed over? I don't know. I still probably wouldn't have done it because, he said it to other people. But
in your book, it's interesting because the teacher in him also talks in a way that creative writing teachers talk.
Yeah.
There's a particular vernacular, and that vernacular is super community oriented. Mm-hmm. And as someone, like, I've been in a writing group for a decade, like, I found that voice to be so real.
Thank
that
you.
Like, writers are coming together into this group, but it was like it was working against the other voice in his head, which is what I loved.
Well, this was his work. This was his job. I mean, he had to earn his crust of bread. He certainly wasn't earning it as a writer. I took one creative writing class in college. I've never been in a workshop like that, but I attempted to teach one once, and it was a disaster. But my husband is a teacher of creative writing, and most of the people I know are writers, and I hear their stories too. But there was, for those of you who haven't read the book, I do have quite a lot of fun with Jake's students at the beginning of the novel. One of them was a real person. I mean, I won't tell you which one, but of all those absurd people in that group, if you're saying to yourself, who could possibly have been the real one? Yeah, well, let me know. I mean, feel free to write to me and ask me. But when I was working in publishing many, many years ago, my last proper job, you could say, in 1987, I got a submission of a manuscript from somebody who must have been out of his mind. I could not believe what I was reading. And, all these years later, I just put him in the book because, I don't know if he's dead or alive. I don't remember his name. I don't know if he ever published his book. Oh, wait a minute. I know he never published his book. Yeah, I haven't heard from him, I guess.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say about your book and your characters. What Jake did, I didn't really have a problem with it. Yeah. I don't know what I would have done in his shoes, but I didn't really think it was crossing the line. But at the same time, I still didn't really like him.
Yeah. Well,
same with P.T. Marsh, John. I mean, here's the main character of your series of books. He's a pretty good guy a lot of times, but a lot of times I don't really like him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have to commend you both for writing characters and Jean, I've seen this in your other books too, characters who are just very real and very human because they are very confusing to us and very, they're just like us because this is not a world of black and white and right and wrong. And we don't know what we would
feel any better. I don't particularly like any of them myself. I mean, I may have a soft spot for one or two, but
listen, your writing made me dislike Hugh Grant, which is pretty much an impossible thing to do, but it did. You mess with my boyfriend there. He's not my boyfriend anymore. So, I mean, you got some skills.
It's the thinking woman sex symbol. Yeah.
Oh goodness. Okay, so John, to come back to your character, I do have this one particular question for you. So as we've mentioned a couple of times, this is actually the third book in a series. I know you wrote, again, this is not a spoiler. I know you wrote this at the end of the book and the acknowledgments that for now the series is done. Why? But talk to me a little bit about writing a series and keeping up with that character over a long period of time. Does it kind of make it easier to have a touchstone to keep coming back to, or maybe is in some ways a little bit difficult? So kind of pros and cons of writing a series.
Of course. Yeah. So there's, so it is like pros and cons, but like, I think the great thing is like by book 3, these are like real people in a way that kind of transcends like a single book. So I think one of the best things, a pro is character arcs. So a lot of books have a chronology that takes place over a really short time. You don't think of it when you're reading a book, but some books take place over a day or a week or a month. And so sometimes to me, like when it's arcing, it feels a little unrealistic, but you can definitely watch people change over 3 books. So you can watch them break, or you can watch them go rotten or go corrupt or heal. The tough thing is like you have to live with anything that's on paper in book 1 going forward. So I think you start thinking about, in some cases, avoiding specifics on things, and in some cases, dropping in longer lead lines and building out a world and kind of saying, okay, like this isn't just the world for now, and this isn't just a moment for now. This has to be a moment that has, that has lasting impact. So I think when I got to the second book, I started thinking about these things. So I started looking at like the books this way. Like the first book is really about, I was looking at this idea of like people and place and plot, and I was thinking, okay, so the first one is really place, and you see the world of Mason Falls, and the second one is more of a character building piece. And I felt like the people that enjoyed that the most like long series, and the third one is like paying off all the storylines. So obviously each one of them have their own mystery in them, but the great thing is sort of taking the time to build out these people's lives. And so I tried to, wrap up certain things that I felt like should not go on any longer, and kind of open up a couple new things, but not too much. But it definitely was like, I'm ready to take a break. Mason Falls, Georgia's had a lot of crime in it. You know, it could use the city.
Yeah,
could
I
use
can
a
think
break.
of, God, for a city of that size, man, they are busy. They're busy
So-
with some really serious stuff.
Yeah, so it could use a break. And so, yeah, I'm kind of onto something new now, and I'm kind of almost done with it. I'm kind of in that like rewrite in the last couple, probably the next 90 days before it's ready to send to my agent.
Gotcha. Well, I have to say, I am a person who likes series because I do get attached to characters. I cry when TV shows end. So
Wow.
I'm kind of, I know I do. I like get really attached to my imaginary friends. But so I'm kind of, on the one hand, I'm sad when you said that Mason Falls and PT might not, and Remy too. I really dig her, that they might not come back. But at the same time, I think you did a very wonderful job of wrapping it up nicely. Susan has another question. John, do you think your knowledge of marketing and advertising influences your writing?
Man, I always, I think everyone goes in thinking I'm going to know some like magic way to market a book, which unfortunately I do not, because books are really, really hard to market. And I've had to learn that kind of the hard way. Like discovery is down because, I mean, discovery was down before COVID, but like now the bookstores are opening back up, but just for people to find and know your book exists is sort of this magical thing. And there's new ones out every week. So I wish I knew more
Pointed
about.
out, a lot of them are really good.
Yes. And so I wish I knew some. I would probably say that most of what advertising has taught me is just about collaboration, and we don't own anything. So I will work on a line or a TV script or something like that. And then someone else on my team will work on my work, and then I'll pick up their work. So you get a sense of, you don't own it, the agency owns it. And you get a sense of collaboration that I think is really helpful when you go into edits with your editor. When they say, hey, I've got this idea, you're used to people saying, I've got this idea, which I think is refreshing for those people sometimes, because there's some writers who don't want that. They don't want an idea to come in at that phase. So I would say just understanding collaboration, and then I would say editing. Like, the projects in advertising sometimes go on for years. So you're used to just grinding and re-editing, and you're used to lots of people having opinions about it who have completely different reasons for having their opinion. They could be operational reasons. It could have to do with some competitor. It could have nothing to do with what you're trying to build creatively. It has to do with something else in the real world. So you get used to being edited.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. So we're almost wrapping up time here. Before we wrap things up completely, I am going to let you each, you already kind of spoke a little bit about it, John, but let you each say, what's, on the horizon for you. But before I let y'all wrap things up with that, I have one other question for you both, and I'll give you a little bit of a pause. You can think about it if you need to take a minute to think about it. But I know that whenever I work on a project or a job or anything like that, I always like to sit back afterwards and reflect on what did I learn what did I learn from it? Both personally and professionally, how did it affect me? So I ask you that, how did writing your latest book, or these books that we're discussing tonight, what did you learn about yourself from writing those books?
I'm ready.
Go ahead.
Well, this is not a difficult one for me because it was, this is a book that was born in the middle of a bad meeting with my editor, at which she was turning down a book that I'd spent years on. It was written entirely during a pandemic, which I was terrified about. I don't want to make a thing of this, except maybe I do, but I had been scared about what I feared was coming back in the fall of 2019. And that did not ease up at all when it actually came. So, and I was also very angry about how things were being mishandled and politicized. And I was alone with my husband, alone with my husband in a very remote house very scared, very angry, and I just churned this book out in 4 or 5 months, which is a stupid thing to do. I guess maybe under any other circumstances, a book written in 4 months is not a book I want to read. Um, and yet there was no other way for this book to come into the world. It was just, I wrote all day, every day. I didn't want to be in the real world. So what did I learn? I guess I learned that fear and rage in the right proportions can fuel a book. I guess I learned that I could do it, but I'll tell you what, I never ever want to do this again. I never want to have this particular writing experience again. And because I do not want to have these circumstances in our lives ever again.
No.
I have spoken.
Thank you. Agreed. John, what about you?
So I would say probably one of the things, so I was talking earlier about arcing the character, and when you get to know a character, like I think readers get to know them and writers get to know them during a series, like there's a responsibility to like these people and these characters. So I would say, I started with a character, in PT that's, self-endangering and obfuscating and, in some cases, he's not being a good partner. And then he's got someone who's a partner who's naive and trying to learn. So like watching those two people kind of cross and actually having the responsibility to like help him go on a journey and help him heal was kind of healing, for me. Like watching someone do that, there's something you learn from it. And, I think at the same time as the books went on, I mean, his partner, Remy Morgan, her character to me kind of in a way became my favorite character in the book. And, you see her kind of coming to terms with some of that, deciding like, do I want to accept this? Like, do I have to accept his way? And, and you see that throughout the series. And then you even see her becoming slightly cynical in a way that you need to survive in the world and being realistic. So that was some of the coolest things watching that develop throughout the third book.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, real quick, self-promotion time. Tell us which one of your books we're going to get to buy next. Jean, I know you definitely have something coming out, has already been announced, coming out next year. So tell us about that. And then John, let us know too.
Well, I hope it won't shock you to learn that the very book that my editor was in the process of rejecting when I pitched her the plot out of nowhere is finished now. And it has finally been accepted. And when I say finally, I mean last week. We went through so many drafts. It is a completely different book than it was in January of 2020. I'm very happy with this book. It is called The Latecomer, which is very appropriate given its journey, a word I hate. But I would not call it a suspense novel. I would call it suspenseful. It has lots of twists of its own, but it is not a novel about a crime or anything like that. But I'm very happy with the book, and I'm very happy that it's over. It's coming out in May of next year. It's already pre-orderable online.
Oh, great.
And I'm very relieved that it's over.
Perfect. Congratulations.
Spoken like a writer. I'm glad it's over. So I said I took a break from my series, so I'm just writing a standalone right now. Can't talk too much about it. I don't have a deal in place on it at all. So, but I would call it it's a high concept FBI ensemble piece, and I literally got to the last page the other night. So I mentioned I was on a research kind of road trip started in Houston and drove, ended up I think I ended in Orange Beach, Alabama, kind of just weaving my way around and working after hours when I wasn't doing my day job, working at night and kind of researching on the evening and the weekends. So I got to the proverbial, the end moment, I think 2 nights ago, but that doesn't mean the end, that just means the beginning of the punch list and all the things. So, but it's always a really cool moment. So no idea when that's coming out. Probably, I don't know, a year from now, more, who knows? We'll see.
We'll
but it's I think it's I feel really great about it. I love it.
So I'm sure we will too. So listen, I want to thank y'all so much for being here with us this evening. Penny added here in the comment section, this has been the most thoughtful discussion I've heard among writers since way before Zoom. Thanks to all.
So nice.
And I have to say, Penny, I absolutely agree with you. This is just a fantastic conversation tonight. Thank y'all so much for being here with us and being a part of the Six Bridges Book Festival. Want to remind everyone, those links are there for you to buy their books. Buy books, people. That's what keeps these guys writing and keeps them giving these gifts to us. So please check out their works. Make sure you check out the other authors at the fest, and you still have a few more sessions that you can join in on. We're going through Sunday, so it's not too late to catch a bunch of really exciting sessions. I know I'm going to be on at noon tomorrow with TJ Clune. I can't wait to listen to him. So please join some more sessions, buy these books, check out these authors, and give a big virtual round of applause to Jean and John for being here with us this evening. It's been wonderful.
Here in person, please.
Yes, absolutely. Fingers crossed. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Amy.
Have a good night, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.